Knowing the unit circle when evaluating trig functions or expressions is really important because it really helps you remember their values. Like if you guys wanted to find sine at pi over 6, if you wanted to find out what sine of pi over 6 equals, you just have to think about the angle pi over 6, which is right here. This is the pi over 6 angle. These are the coordinates right at pi over 6. And what you would have to remember is that in the unit circle, when looking at these triangles, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And since the hypotenuse always equals 1, we don't care about him because whenever you divide by 1, it's just the same thing. So whatever the opposite is, that's going to be your sine. And our opposite right now is the y value. Actually, it always is the y value. So I could put sine right there, and I could put cosine right here. Sine is always the y value. Cosine is always the x value because cosine is adjacent, which is this side right here, over hypotenuse, which in our unit circle, the hypotenuse equals 1. So again, the hypotenuse doesn't matter. So if you remember the unit circle, it really helps with finding trig values. So if the y value at pi over 6 is 1/2, your answer to this is just simply 1/2. And then cosine of pi over 6, that would be rad 3 over 2. Okay, now some people don't know the unit circle, so they have memorized another dumb table thing, which I will write, but I don't like. It looks something like this. This is one way you can do it. You put sine right here, then cosine, then tangent. And then they put pi over 6, and then pi over 4, and then pi over 3 across the top. Now that's just pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3 right there. And then they memorize everything that goes inside. And so pi over 6 is 1/2, pi over 4 is rad 2 over 2, and then pi over 3 is rad 3 over 2. And then cosine is just going to be the flip of that. Rad 3 over 2 is going to be for pi over 6, and then we have rad 2 over 2, and then we have 1/2. So we're just looking at all the x values of these coordinates. So I have rad 2 over 2, and then 1/2. Finally, tangent. Tangent is just, that's opposite over adjacent, so that's opposite divided by adjacent, so it's y value divided by x value. So you're just going to go this divided by this. Now, instead of thinking division with fractions, you think multiply by the reciprocals. So it'd be 1/2 times 2 over rad 3, so this would equal 1 over rad 3. So our first one is 1 over rad 3. In calculus, you can leave it as 1 over rad 3. In algebra 2 trig, you need to rationalize that, which would make it into rad 3 over 3, but we're going to leave it like this since I'm making this for a calculus class. And then this one's simple because you just divide these two right here, which is 1, and then the last one, it'd be rad 3 over 2 times the reciprocal of 1/2, which is 2 over 1. Those cancel out. You're left with rad 3. So some people memorize this table instead of remembering the unit circle, which works. Sine of pi over 6 would be right there. Okay, and then cosine of pi over 6 would be right there. Tangent of pi over 6 would be right there, and memorizing the table. I hate the table, honestly. I think knowing the unit circle is way better because when you know the unit circle, you also know the quadrants that you're in. So, for example, like let's say I had sine of 4 pi over 3. Now, because it's 4 pi over 3, it's greater than 3 pi over 3, which means it's greater than pi. So pi with a denominator of 3 would be 3 pi over 3. And so I'm looking at this, I'm going around my unit circle, there's 1 pi over 3, there's 2 pi over 3, there's 3 pi over 3, and then we have 4 pi over 3. I know that I'm in quadrant 3 right here. So this is quadrant 1, 2, and 3. In quadrant 3, I can see that the x is negative and the y is negative. That means both sine and cosine are negative. That's what it says right here. Sine and cosine are negative. And these right here are the reciprocals of sine and cosine. So if I have this unit circle in my head, I know that this is going to be negative. My answer is negative. Well, how would you use the table for this dude? You would have to know the reference angle for 4 pi over 3. Now, when you're in radians, it's kind of easy to know the reference angle because the denominator gives it away. So if my denominator is 3, then the reference angle would be this guy right here, pi over 3. So I would reference this angle from the first quadrant. And so check this out. Since I know we're down here and we're negative, see the rad 3 over 2? That's the sign. Over here, it's negative rad 3 over 2. So I just got to put rad 3 over 2 over here. And now you can probably see how we can use the table. Sine, there's pi over 3. is rad 3 over 2, and since we're in quadrant 3, we know that it's negative. So that's how you use the unit circle. That's how you use a table for the regular trig functions. You have sine, you have cosine, and then you have tangent. Next one, I'll tell you about the inverse trig functions.